Hey guys, so a lot of people have asked for my opinion on the Frost Mage legendary changes that are coming in 9.05, which is in a couple days, this coming Tuesday, March 9th. So it's coming up pretty quick. And I figured I'd take this opportunity to talk about all the things that are changing for Frost Mage in 9.05. So here we go. So first up, Covenant abilities. Kyrion's Radiant Spark got its damage increased by 20%. Now, this is not how much the stacks of the spark, the 4 stacks, increase the damage of your spells. This is just the flat damage of the spark itself, which unfortunately is kind of trivial. So even with 20%, it's still going to be trivial. Necrolord, Deathborn. It lasts longer, and it gives you more spell power. Mirrors of Torment for Venthyr. Obviously, this isn't necessarily for Frost Mage, but I understand a lot of Frost Mages like to multi-spec, play Fire and Arcane as well. They don't like to one-trick Frost. Some people do, some people don't. At the end of beta, when they reworked Mirrors of Torment to give Frost Brain Freeze, the consensus was this is great for Frost, okay for Fire, and terrible for Arcane. And at the time, a lot of people suggested, hey, it should give, a little more cooldown reduction on Fire Blast for Fire, and it would be pretty decent if it gave clear casting for Arcane. And they didn't do that at the time. And basically they did it now. So a lot of the changes throughout here are actually kind of reverting late beta changes to where they were at the end of beta. And, for Necrolord, Fleshcraft was buffed by a lot, actually. My thoughts on this: Radiant Spark, this is still trivial. Even the best logs from Kyrian Frost Mages, Radiant Spark is less than 2% of your damage. It's maybe 1.8% of your damage. So this isn't going to change that. I am of the mentality that all buffs are good. I'm not going to poo-poo on any buffs. If you like playing Kyrian Mage, it's a buff. It's not much of a buff, but it's a buff. Deathborn, this is a decent buff. Unfortunately, Blizzard's always kind of stated that their design goal for mid-season balance changes is that they don't want to upset what min-max type of players have invested into, this is the best legendary or covenant, so I've invested all my work into this so far. They don't want something to upset the balance of that. And they've kind of, in my opinion, historically not been great at that. But with these changes, I think they're doing a good job of it. Both the Covenant changes and the Legendary changes, and a lot of other spec buffs that have come and gone already in the first couple months of Shadowlands. They've actually been doing a pretty good job of it this time. So if you like playing Kyrian, or you like playing Necrolord, or even if you like playing Venthyr, but you also like, dabbling in Fire and Arcane sometimes, these are all good buffs, right? So let's look over at the Sims real quick. And these are done by a guy in the Mage theory crafting community named Torghast. He puts a lot of work into these every time there's any PTR changes and everything. So huge thanks to him for that. But PTR Soulbinds. So Frost, single target. And I want to highlight the Necrolord changes here and, how they sim out. So for single target, obviously you can see, Venthyr is far and away the best, and that's because of mirrors, and how good mirrors are for Frost, because it generates 3 brain freezes. Cannot be beat for single target. Because Frost's biggest weakness in single target is when you cast a bunch of Frost Bolts and you don't get a proc. So what does mirrors do? It forces procs. So, one of your biggest weaknesses, it shores that up. And, I mean, Necrolord is second here. That's great. But it's pretty far behind. Now, yes, if you go to 3 target, you're going to see Necrolord way up here, which, I mean, you probably kind of expect, right? Because what does it do? It splits Frostbolt into 3 targets. So, on 3 target, it should be great. Even on 5 target, it sims very well. The reason I don't think this is going to upset the balance of either Venthyr or Night Fae, depending on your type of content for Frost, is the cooldown on this ability is really long. 3 minutes feels like it may as well be an hour, especially when Mirrors is a minute and a half. I believe Spark is even shorter than that. I don't play Kyrian, but anyway, 3 minute cooldown. And what does it do? It gives you a bunch of spell damage bonus, which is good. I mean, I'm not going to argue with that, but it splits your Frostbolt into 3 and hits 3 targets. The problem with that for Frost is, if you look at Frost's damage breakdown, Frostbolt is not much of your damage. You don't cast Frostbolt for damage, which is why with Slick Ice Legendary, you don't prioritize Frostbolt when you have it up. You just do your normal rotation. You just do it faster. You cast Frostbolt to generate procs. It generates Fingers Frost procs, Brain Freeze procs, and that's where all your damage comes from. Frostbolt is a vehicle, a means by which to generate procs, and your damage comes from your procs. So the fact that it splits Frostbolt into 3, cool, but not great. And the problem is those second and third Frostbolts to the additional targets, they can't proc additional Fingers of Frost or Brain Freeze charges. So you're not getting additional procs out of this ability. So long cooldown, buffs a weak spell, doesn't generate any additional procs. So unless you're really like dead set on Necro, because it looks cool, if you are, it's not going to be terrible by any means. But the problem is, so obviously in single target, like if you primarily raid, it's easy to see. Like Venthyr is obviously going to be the best. Necrolord is okay, but I mean, if you're playing Necrolord, it's more than likely, you're focusing on like Mythic Plus content, right? The problem is that in Mythic Plus dungeons, you still have to do single target damage. Sometimes. You still have bosses. And especially on tyrannical weeks, the bosses are, make or break. Like if you mess up on a boss, it's a party wipe, and you're probably not gonna time the key. And if you're doing really, really weak single target damage, then the longer it takes to kill the boss, the more strained you are on cooldowns and healer mana and all those kind of things. But also, regardless of which week it is, you still have to kill Pridefuls every 20%, right? And especially like if you're running with a Disc Priest who has limited mana, if you don't burn that Prideful down really quick, you're going to start struggling. And again, you risk wiping. And Venthyr is phenomenal for that. So even if Necrolord gains some strength on AoE, you still have to single target. And I am of the opinion that Venthyr shores up one of our biggest weaknesses, is like when you have to do single target and you have those streaks of no procs, your single target really tanks. And the Venthyr ability is able to shore up that weakness. Our AoE is fine regardless of which covenant you go, especially if it's Necrolord or Night Fae, your AoE is going to be like good, but your single target will be worse. And you have to be good at both to get through this content, right? So that's my opinion on the Necrolord buff. It's nice if you're really dead set on playing Necrolord Mage, but it's not the best. So next up, legendary rune carving items. And as far as Frost Mage is concerned, 4 legendaries that we have access to, 2 Frost specific and 2 generic, all got buffed. Disciplinary Command increases critical strike damage by, it was 15%, now it's 20%. Expanded Potential, procs per minute went from 1.6 to 2. Cold Front went from 60 stacks to 30 stacks, which is a buff because of, how that works. So every 30 Frostbolts or Flurries, you get a free Frozen Orb. And the nice part about this is, since Flurry has 3 bolts to it, it does gain 3 stacks from a Flurry. So Every time you consume that Brain Freeze Flurry, you're actually getting 30 stacks towards this. Or, I'm sorry, 3 stacks. And last but not least, Freezing Winds now triggers Fingers of Frost every 2 seconds instead of 3 seconds. It triggers a free Fingers of Frost more frequently. And this is exactly where it was at the end of beta. So at the end of Shadowlands beta, everyone was using Freezing Winds for AoE, and it was at 2 seconds. At one point, it also had some Frozen Orb cooldown reduction tacked onto it. They took that away like around the middle of beta. But then they couldn't decide, should it be 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, whatever. They settled on 3 seconds, and because of that, our go-to AoE legendary basically became Glacial Fragments. So the problem with expanded potential, it sounds cool on paper, right? You have a chance to not consume your Brain Freeze, and your Brain Freeze is your most impactful spell. So what's not to love about getting extra Brain Freezes, right? Because every Brain Freeze you get is an automatic free 2 Ice Lances as well, or 2 Shattered Ice Lances. That's awesome, in theory. Because when is Brain Freeze most powerful? When you have to move, right? You have some procs banked up, and Expunge is coming up on Hungering Destroyer, or the knockback is coming up on Sired Nazris, whatever. You have to move. And you have some procs banked up, and you're able to fling off those procs, Brain Freeze, Ice Lance. Those are global cooldowns where you can be moving and still dealing damage. Your damage doesn't drop off because you have to move. The problem with this is, A, the proc rate is not under your control. You are just as likely to get this when you need it as you are to not get this when you need it, and you can't control that. And B, all the use cases where you would use expanded potential for a heavy movement fight overlap with the use cases for Freezing Winds. And Freezing Winds can do all of those use cases and more, but better. So think about it. Every time you have to move on whatever boss, you maybe you hold your Frozen Orb for a few seconds, and right before you move, you throw out a Frozen Orb. Now you're generating free Fingers of Frost, and you're just shooting off Ice Lances the whole time you're moving. And that is entirely within your control as the player. You don't have to hope for a proc. You have guaranteed procs. So this would be cool if Freezing Winds didn't do it better and you had some kind of control over it. I still don't really think this is going to see any use. I wouldn't recommend crafting it. If for some reason you really like this legendary, it is a buff. And when we look at the sims, you'll see, it sims pretty well. I don't know in practice how that's going to play out. Personally, I wouldn't recommend crafting this one, because everything that it does, other legendaries do better, unfortunately. Next up, Disciplinary Command. And this is an interesting one. So all you have to do is cast a Fire, Frost, and Arcane spell within a few seconds of each other, and you get 20% bonus critical strike damage for 20 seconds, and you can do that every 30 seconds, which has, that's a pretty high uptime, right? So that got buffed from 15% to 20%. Now, obviously, Frost values critical strike damage pretty heavily. So I think once we get up to, 32, 33% crit soft cap, where effectively all of our Ice Lances are, almost, if not guaranteed crits, right? This is going to have some potential. And I don't think a lot of people have crafted this and played around with it yet, because, with Frostmage being in a pretty unique position when Shadowlands came out, we didn't have one legendary to fit them all, right? like fire, for instance. Fire can craft Fevered Incantation, and that works for all content, or Firestorm, really. Um, but anyway, one legendary fits all the content, and we were forced to choose, right? We were forced to get twice the Soul Ash because, as the Mage Theory crafting community kind of came up with the plan, right, to recommend to people, hey, if you want to do raiding and single target, uh, and Mythic Plus, etc., you're kind of going to need both Slick Ice and Glacial Fragments. So again, we had to craft twice. We had to farm up twice the Soul Ash, craft 2 legendaries instead of 1. So that set Frost back a lot on being able to craft, legendaries for fun. Like, oh, what do I feel like crafting next? Maybe I'll play around with Disciplinary Command. And so I don't think Disciplinary Command has seen a lot of use. However, I think it has potential. Um, I'm not sure where I am on this one. I'm not entirely sold on it. I don't think it's going to be the best. Um, but I would not be surprised if eventually we start, seeing people on the logs doing some interesting things with this legendary. And we'll look at it on the Sims in a sec too. Cold Front. Um, Cold Front has had an interesting history, man. Like, so I played the last couple months of beta, and it started out at 15. So I honestly forget exactly where it was in Legion, because this is based on a Legion legendary that every X number of Frostbolts and Flurry Bolts would give you a free Combat Storm. And you can't argue with the fact that Frozen Orb is better, right? But it went from 15 to 90, which, let me tell you, at 90, even if you are chain casting, you will see a proc of a free Frozen Orb like once every 3 minutes, maybe something like that. It took forever, and at the very end, they reneged a little bit and pushed it back to 60, but that was still way too slow, right? So 30 is obviously, it's twice as good as it was before, but in order for this to have potential to oust Slick Ice as best, I think it would have to come down around 25. But again, that's not really their design goal, is to upset what's best, right? They want to buff things that haven't gotten a lot of use to where they're good, but not best. And this absolutely is good. Like, if you really like that playstyle, it's a lot better than it was. In fact, it's twice as good as it was. The problem with Cold Front, even after the buff, is think about, are you using it for single target or AoE purposes? If you're using it for single target, I mean, it's a nice buff. It's twice as good as it was before, but Slick Ice is still better. And for most Frost Mages, you already have Slick Ice. So, I can't justify, recommending someone to craft this legendary. And for AoE, I mean, it's kind of a conflict, right? You don't want to cast single target spells to get this free Frozen Orb for AoE purposes. That doesn't make sense. Like, why would you cast single target spells if you're trying to do more AoE? I do, however, believe that this puts Cold Front in a pretty good future position, where it has potential for, if in 9.1 or 9.2 or whatever, we find ourselves able to equip 2 legendaries, I think this puts Cold Front in a unique position where it might be one of the 2 that we use for single target, right? Because, it would synergize very well with Slick Ice. Slick Ice and Cold Front, they would kind of go hand in hand together, and that would be a cool combo. Right now, when we can only wear 1, it's just not as good as Slick Ice, so I wouldn't make it. But it has potential for, if we can use 2 legendaries in the future, this might be one of them for single target. Last but not least, Freezing Winds. This is a very, very, very good change. And because of this change, Freezing Winds is the 3rd legendary that I have already crafted on live. I'm getting ready to have some fun with Freezing Winds at 2 seconds in Mythic Plus, in Raid. I'm really looking forward to this buff. Like I said, it flip flopped between 2 and 3 seconds at the end of beta. Freezing Winds is the best legendary that you can get for funnel, which, you know, a lot of people have seen Limit Max's video talking about how Frost Mage is the best funnel in the game. You know, I hang out in Mage Discord every day, most days, and the amount of people coming in there asking about funnel after that video came out is like staggering. Like nobody was talking about this um, before that video, and now almost everyone is talking about this. So if this is generating a free Fingers of Frost proc every 2 seconds, that's almost as fast as you can use them. So the whole time that Frozen Orb is out. The nice thing about this is Frozen Orb doesn't even have to be hitting anything. So, like, hey, you threw out your Frozen Orb and the target died, but the Frozen Orb is still sitting out there. You're still generating procs. You know, even if it's not hitting anything over here anymore, you know, you've switched to a target over here, but the orb is over here and it's not hitting your new target, you're still generating the procs because it's still out. And especially for Mythic Plus, this becomes a phenomenal legendary for funneling damage into a priority target, which there's, I mean, pretty much every Mythic Plus dungeon has several pulls where you need to focus a priority target. Especially like Sanguine Depths, for instance, is a, you know, perfect one with the Overseers. So it doesn't really get better than Freezing Winds, because if it's an AoE pack, you can put down your Blizzard, which is taking cooldown reduction off of your Frozen Orb, and the whole time your Frozen Orb is out, you're generating these Ice Lance procs, which do a lot of damage to your main target, and, you know, a little bit reduced damage to a secondary target, right? You know, passive cleave. I think this is going to be great on Huntsmen, Stone Legion Generals, especially any fight where there's like 2 targets, right? But also any instance where you have to funnel damage into a priority target. The thing about Freezing Winds is, in 9.0, we recommended, if you want a single target, if it's a single target fight, you go Slick Ice. Single target, or Slick Ice is great at single target, not very good at AoE. Glacial Fragments is great at AoE on anything above 2 targets, but once you get up to 4 and 5, it's like insane. But it's terrible at single target. The really nice thing about Freezing Winds is it's not as good as Slick Ice on single target, and it's not as good on overall AoE damage as Glacial Fragments, but it's pretty darn good at both of those things. So you can be wearing one legendary and you can have pretty good single target and pretty good AoE and incredible priority target funnel damage. So I'm probably going to be using this for Mythic Plus from now on. There's definitely still instances where I'll use Glacial Fragments, especially like bolstering weeks, for instance, where you want everything to die relatively evenly. Glacial Fragments does that very well. But I think Freezing Winds is going to see a lot of play in Mythic Plus from now on. But if you crafted Slick Ice and Glacial Fragments and maxed them out, you're looking for a third legendary to craft, I highly recommend, and I've done this, crafting Freezing Winds as your third. There's definitely going to be a lot of use cases. So, and I'll talk about this, I'm making a Mythic Plus guide next, but Tyrannical, the other side, the platform ads of Mazala. You really have no way to generate procs, so it's very hard to kill them in time. Not with Freezing Winds. Theater of Pain, where, you know, you have a lot of small pulls. Freezing Winds is going to be great. But perhaps the coolest part of this getting such a significant buff is if you just started playing Frost Mage, or maybe you were Fire and you want to start switching over and make a Frost legendary, to, dabble in Frost. Or maybe your Frost Mage is an alt and you really don't feel like committing to making multiple legendaries. Freezing Winds is finally at 2 seconds. It's finally a very good one size fits all, like a jack of all legendary that you can have one legendary equipped for all kinds of content. And I mean, on pure single target fights, yeah, someone using Slick Ice is probably still going to outdo you. And on heavy AoE, someone using Glacial Fragments is still probably going to outdo you on overall. But, if that's where you're at, Freezing Winds is super solid. I'm a huge fan of this buff. I think that Freezing Winds is the winner of this patch. And before I forget, let's go over and look at the sims, okay? So, legendaries on PTR. So, for one target, obviously Slick Ice is pretty significantly out ahead. Expanded Potential, like I said, sims very well. Disciplinary Command is a very close third. So, again, without delving into how much crit the templates that were used for these sims have, I believe they're very high crit, though. So, Disciplinary Command and Expanded Potential, these are solid buffs. If you really want to try these legendaries out, now's the time. Cold Front is, again, not far behind. Like I said, I think it synergizes very well with Slick Ice, so if we find ourselves using two, I think that might be one of them. All right, 3 target. This is kind of what I was talking about on AoE. Glacial Fragments grows more and more powerful at 5 targets, obviously. 5 targets, it's way out ahead. But, 3 targets, they're pretty even. And the bonus of Freezing Winds here is that you're pumping on the priority target. So this just reflects kind of overall damage, not necessarily priority target. But I mean, you can see how strong this is, right? And 5 target again. Freezing Winds still really, really solid. These two are obviously Glacial Fragments is, again, overall way out ahead, but you do have to remember that Glacial Fragments does its damage very evenly. It's very flat. Freezing Winds is almost the opposite. Freezing Winds is really good at pumping into a single target and doing a lot of good passive cleave, which is not as much overall, but depending on the situation, that may be what you need. So Freezing Winds gained a ton of value here. Okay. Last but not least, we got a lot of Torghast changes, which, if anybody's still grinding out all these legendaries, maybe you decided, well, now I want to try Disciplinary Command, Expanded Potential, whatever the case may be. They pretty much erased all of the Torghast powers that nobody was ever taking. Like polymorphing an enemy gives you Ice Barrier and things like that. All of those are gone and overhauled with new powers that are actually pretty darn good. Rooting enemies grants you 50% extra damage to all spells for 8 seconds. Combine that with Grizzly Icicle. Yes, please. Rooting enemies, and then, you can just sit there spamming Ice Lance for 50% extra bonus damage, and it doesn't break the Frost Nova. That's insane. During Alter Time, you and your mirror images gain Time Warp. Again, yes, please, especially if you have smart mirror images. That's going to absolutely melt. Ice Block has no cooldown. I mean, how cool is that for, you get in trouble, you Ice Block, especially if you want to take the 60% heal, I think it is, while you're in Ice Block, and you can move around and leave a Frost Path, whatever. Damage absorbed by barriers grants 20% increased intellect. That's insane. All right. I believe this used to be the one where you polymorph an enemy and you get Ice Barrier. I think it turned into this. But anyway, Flurry increased by a flat 25%. Hard to argue with, right? This is the blinking through Mallrats one. Okay, so now it's refreshes your blink cooldown when blinking through an enemy, any enemy, and blinking through Mallrats will kill them instantly. So they're kind of bringing back Art of the Blink Mage, right? You just have to chain it by blinking through enemies. So if you want to travel all the way to the end, especially if you get that power that's like, you can't take damage for the next minute and a half, and then you go to the next floor and you want to like chain blink all the way through the enemies to the end, and then when it's got like 20 seconds left, you just AoE them all down. That's super fun, and basically this allows you to do that. Sapphire Prism was that's a huge buff. Instead of one extra mirror image per stack, now you get two, and it's common, so you'll see it more often. I don't know if this has a reduced stack size limit though, like to where effectively, great, you get an extra two per stack instead of one, but it can't stack as high or something, so you're still only getting like the same effective number of mirror images. I don't know, but still cool. Creeping freeze now functions without ever warm socks. This is the being able to move while you're in ice block kind of thing. Increase damage of mirrors of torment by 25%. Not bad. Mirrors of Torment cooldown resets if the target dies while afflicted. That's pretty cool. Before, Mirror Image had to deal the killing blow, which is like absolutely impossible to do. Now, if you still have Mirrors of Torment on the target at all when it dies, you get mirrors back. That is great for Frost because, again, what do you get out of mirrors? You get 3 brain freezes. And Maldo's Cane, Rat Liver, Alluring Cheese, all the like lures, maw rats, the stuff that I can't even imagine anyone ever taking for any reason has all been completely removed. So, what's the too long didn't watch version? If you really have your heart set on playing Kyrian or Necrolord, obviously Night Fae and Venthyr were already good for Frostmage. For different purposes, single target or AoE respectively. But if you really like playing Kyrian or Necrolord, buffs are buffs, especially for Necrolord. Necrolord got a pretty significant buff. It's obvious they want people playing Necrolord because statistically they aren't. And you're going to be better than you were before, but you're still not going to be the best. If you like multi-specking and you're Venthyr, Fire and Arcane basically got a better version of Mirrors of Torment now. Disciplinary Command, Expanded Potential, Cold Front, and Freezing Winds all got solid buffs. I still would not recommend Expanded Potential because its use cases are kind of overlapped by Freezing Winds, and Freezing Winds does it better. Freezing Winds has a lot of use cases, and it's going to be a very solid legendary. I think if you've already crafted Slick Ice and Glacial Fragments, Freezing Winds is a very good choice for your third legendary. And if you only want to craft one legendary for Frost, Freezing Winds would be my go-to. Cold Front, I don't think it's powerful enough to go out and craft it right now. Slick Ice is still going to do it better. This is a single target legendary. Slick Ice is still better. But if we can eventually use 2 legendaries, I think this is in a good place now. And basically everything that we didn't use in Torghast got significant buffs. So I think Torghast is going to be a lot easier as Frostmage. So if you decide to go farm up Soul Ash to make some of these new legendaries, it's going to be a lot more fun. That's it, guys. That's my thoughts on all the changes coming in 9.05. My next project is going to be a Frostmage Mythic Plus guide. However, it's a pretty big undertaking, and I'm covering a lot of stuff. So I don't know if I'm going to get it done by Tuesday when 9.05 releases. But honestly, a lot of this stuff is going to get covered again in there. If you guys like my content, you want to see more of it, I just want to say every one of you who subscribes to my channel goes a long way towards supporting and growing my channel. So I really appreciate all of you who do that. Thank you, guys. You can always check me out on my Twitch stream. Guaranteed streams every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, guys.